All right.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm opening up this Rhinebeck Central School District Board of Education budget workshop. It's March 8th, 2014. May I have a motion to appoint Meg Tedisco Clerk Pro Tem?
So moved.
By Mark.
Second.
Seconded by Lisa. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Meg, thank you for being here this morning to be our clerk. And I also want to thank all of you who are here this morning. It's important work that we do today, and hopefully we'll get a lot done. But I recognize that it takes time away from other obligations and family time that you have. So we do appreciate your presence here. It is important. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Fanley.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre. Just a couple of minutes to go over what our process is today and our ground rules, so to speak. This is a board workshop. It's not, technically speaking, a regular meeting like we have every other Tuesday. And the purpose of today's meeting is to provide the board with a block of time to concentrate on, to address, to discuss a specific targeted issue, in this case the 2014-15 budget under development. We've invited the district's administrators here so they're able to answer your questions or participate in the discussion as you might wish them to do. Essentially, this is your work session on the topic of the budget. There is no requirement under the law to provide an opportunity for the public to speak or ask questions, although you always have that option. Traditionally, we have put a public comment section on our agenda, but that's not required. So, and that's at the discretion of the chair as to whether you want to invite or allow comments, questions, etc. from the public. This is for you to ask questions, and we're not taking any action today. We're not making any decisions today in terms of the budget process. We have at least until the second Tuesday in April to finalize a budget. That's what's on our budget calendar. We actually could go as late as 2 weeks later and still be within the time frame for adopting a budget. So if we find that we need additional time, we have an additional 2 weeks. We could actually go to the third Tuesday of April to finalize a decision on a spending plan that's going to go to the public for their approval at the annual budget vote in towards the end of May. Just to give everybody an idea what our timeline is. We still have a good chunk of time, although we've started this process in December, so we're well into it, and this is hardly an early budget discussion. We're actually kind of towards the end of the process. So that's kind of what we're here to do today, and what our ground rules are. In terms of the content and format of the budget, there are, in its infinite wisdom, New York State has two different ways of requiring us to put together, to format a budget. And I'm sure there's some technical term that I'm forgetting, but the traditional way of doing it is the way we'll be working with the budget today, and the way we've been working with the budget since we started, to divide all of the various parts of the budget up into budget codes. Probably about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, and that's the format that we report our budget to the state. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
When you file an ST3, it's
Right,
in the exact same format, but when you present it to the public at the budget hearing, it will be in a component basis, where it breaks it down into 3 components: administrative, capital, and I want to say operational, but the teaching, instructional. Instructional is the term they use.
So anyway, I bring that up here just to let you know that when we have our budget hearing as required by law actually it'll be in May, It'll be the same budget, the bottom line will be the same, but the formatting will be different. There's no reason for us to get into looking at it in that format now. I think this is a more comfortable and familiar way to deal with the way the budget's formatted. But just so you know, when you see the three-part budget in May, and that's how we're supposed to put it in our budget brochure, is in this three-part format. It'll look different, but it'll have everything that this budget has. It's just formatted differently. So that's just want to get that out of the way. At this point, I'm going to let Tom talk some more about the New York State tax levy cap, and we have some late-breaking information to share with you that we found out about just yesterday morning. It will impact our budget deliberations going forward. So, right. Tom, if you want to direct them to an item that's at their places. And
so what we want to get is the tax levy limit, and we'll say for the 2014-15 third draft budget final. It was submitted to SED, or the State Controller's Office. During that time, yesterday while I was submitting it, they've changed the whole process of how you submit that off. I mean, it basically tells you what it does it for you. It's pretty amazing now. They should have came out with that to begin with, because you had every business official and every official across New York State trying to determine what that is. Now you go in there, it basically tells you now what your levy limit is. But I'm just going to go through this and I'll show you where the change has been made. But what they do, basically, they start with the prior year tax levy, which was just slightly under $25.5 million last year. This community grew by 0.7%, which was quite large. That's one of the second biggest one in Dutchess County. So that's very favorable. It looks as though building is going on in this community, and you start to see it around here, which is a good thing. It helps grow the tax base. We then add in the pilots. Those are payments in lieu of taxes. We have a very small one, but those monies get added to this formula. In the end, the next year's gets subtracted off. The next one is your taxes levy. This is the exemptions from the prior year. These are called they're called capital local expenditures, and basically what you do is you take your debt service for your energy performance contracts and your serial bonds, just as we refinanced them last year. So you take that total debt service and subtract the building aid you receive from that, and that's the share that is really the taxes support that part of the building projects. So that gets subtracted out of there. We come up with an adjusted. And for this year, the allowable growth factor is the lesser of 2% or the CPI. And since this process began a few years ago, it's been at 2%. But the CPI this year dropped. It's at 1.46. So remember, it's the lesser of 2% or the CPI. So the CPI last year was 1.46. So that generates a multiplication factor. And then we subtract out the pilots for this coming year, and then we get to add in the carryover. And that's where the interpretation at the state has changed this past year. It's been an interpretation that's gone back and forth over the past couple years. I had the state controller in here last year who looked over my numbers from the year before with the carryover, no problem whatsoever. But over this past, within the past few months, an interpretation has come down to say that, and this is the number which goes on to the top of the next page, you see $826,000, the tax levy limit there. Your prior year tax levy needed to be less than that. If you go back to the first page and the first number at the top, see there's a difference of about $600,000, over $600,000. Because of that, you're not allowed to use carryover. So in questioning the state officials up there, I said, so in other words, no one will ever have a carryover. And he says, you're correct. Carryover basically is eliminated. It can only be happening in one way, and that is when you have large debt service coming on, but you're not getting the state aid yet. And it will be the only time a carryover basically will be allowed. So that took $162,000 off the table that we had saved from last year that we were going to apply towards this year. The state is saying you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to. Last year when we did this, it was allowable. Now it's not allowable. So that is hurting our bottom line. And we'll see that later on, what it really means to the bottom line. But basically, $162,000 came out of there. Now this is a savings to the taxpayers, okay? It was a savings last year. We did not raise those monies last year with the idea of raising them this year, but now we can't raise those, so that does help the taxpayer out, so it won't be collected this year or any future years because it's now a part of the base. I think if we had known differently last year, we might have did things differently, no doubt about it. But you never know. There's a little bit of an uproar because a lot of people are falling into this. So, but the State Education Department and the Comptroller's Office are pretty adamant. This is how we're interpreting this. Yes.
I may be the only one, but I need you to run through again the difference. I understand the point about not being able to use carryover that you could have raised but didn't. But what I didn't follow is what the relevance of the prior year's tax levy was to this year's tax levy.
Now that's a good question, and it's a hard thing to explain, and because they were trying to explain it to me yesterday also, because I questioned that too, because I'm trying to look for, there's got to be something in here that we can do. But, the prior year's tax levy is the prior year. That was what got sent out.
That's $25,494,160.
Right. Now, I don't have last year's with me, but if you go to the next page, on the prior page last year, you'll see these exemptions. And there was an exemption in there last year for TRS. That was like $212,000. And we were allowed to raise above and beyond the base last year because the TRS contributions rates went up more than 2%. So that you're able to raise that above that. And that's an oddity. That really shouldn't happen. It's not happening now, and I don't see that happening anytime for a long time. I think we're now starting to see those rates start to go back down with the market looking better. But what they basically say is those exemptions, including those capital local expenditures, need to come off the book because in reality, you're not comparing apples to apples, as they explained to me, is that take away the capital expenditures, take away the TRS exemptions, let's just look at it from 1 year to the next without any of these exemptions is basically what they're saying. And so they're saying is you need to back off all those numbers, the exemptions and all that, and then multiply it by your growth factor. And when you back off those exemptions, and then you apply the factor of only 1.46 this year, or even 2%, no way are you going to get back up to that level again. Because unless you're very low on building aid. She did mention to me that if you're really low on building aid, don't have any projects, yeah, you could probably get some carryover. But anybody who has any type of projects, it just isn't going to work because it backs all that stuff out of there.
Okay.
And that unfortunately creates what we have in front of us. I know there's a couple other school districts, they have money that got left on the table, but I don't think to the same degree that we did as a percentage. I mean, to us, that we left, that translated to a 0.7% that we didn't raise last year. That the board, reduced it to lower the tax rate.
So the upshot, because I'm looking at your prior tax levy calculation, the upshot appears to be, if I'm reading this right, that before this information came out, you had these discussions with the Comptroller's Office, you had projected the additional tax levy requiring a simple majority would be 707,000, and now it's 487,694.
Yep, we're down to 1.9.
And that's completely a function of this
Correct.
calculation, this
Right.
changed calculation.
Right. For a simple majority, we're looking at a tax increase of 1.91%.
As opposed to what, like 2.4 something?
Yeah, we were at 2.45 the last time around with draft number 2. And as we go through this, I'll show you we're going down a little bit more. There's still some other factors playing with it, but yeah, it basically took $162,000 off the table for us is what it did, unfortunately. But there's not too much we can do about it. I did tell the state that we weren't looking to override the cap. There's a question at the very end before you submit, does the board want to override the cap? And I had to submit it, so I said you would not. If you do have plans, let me know. I can always undo it and let them know. But I have reported to the state we're not planning to go exceed the tax cap.
In fact,
for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, our thinking at this point is that even with this change to the revenue side, we think we're going to be okay. There may be less money available to add things to our program than we were thinking there would be when we were having this, in our last discussion. I think at our last discussion, we were about $65,000 below the tax levy cap, and now we're 162, I think, right?
Well, we're at 135, actually.
135 over the cap, but I don't think it's insurmountable, and there's still some figures that we're waiting for that could, between now and the end of March, take care of that. I mean, there's no guarantees, but there are a number of options that we're looking at. So, I mean, while we're disappointed, and I think we all should be disappointed when the state government changes the rules in the middle of the game, and not insignificantly so, and not even telling us ahead of time, hey, by the way, you could do this last year. We decided you can't do it this year. I mean, we're well into our budget development cycle, and we're just finding this out because we're at the point of having to file this digital form with the state, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, there's something wrong with this form, or it's not letting us do what, and we planned last year's on the basis of those rules. So I don't want to sit here all morning and whine about it because I think we just have to move forward, and we're looking at various options. So I'm not sitting here hitting the panic button saying, oh my God, we're in terrible shape. We'll deal with it, but it certainly is at least a setback that's not insignificant. But we'll talk about some of these things as we go throughout the rest of our morning. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention as soon as we knew it. And we just found out about this yesterday.
Right. No, and I'll just amplify that because I think it's important for the public that will see this on YouTube that, I think it's outrageous. It's March 8th, and yesterday we're finding out something that completely shifts the rules and how we manage our budget, starting from last year's decision-making about how we were approaching the budget and the tax levy limit. So it's completely outrageous, and we're clearly, undoubtedly not the only district facing this, but one more squeeze coming from the state when school districts are being squeezed in this manner is really outrageous. And I'm actually just glad that we will have an opportunity to, for what it's worth, to continue. We're meeting with certain of our state legislators, and I think we should bring this up as yet another example of the state's heavy-handed approach and not supportive approach to actually, funding school districts properly. So, it's important.
Okay, so we'll move on, and this discussion will cross over with some other discussions that I expect we'll have this morning. Tom, do you want to address
now we'll go over to looking at our fund balance currently for this year and going forward. So
you have a sheet
at your place. You should have a sheet that's just a single sheet. I got a lot of backup for it, but I think you need to have that. I'll talk about that backup, but these are things that we can control. And taking a look at this year, we're actually doing pretty good. Last year, we ended with the fund balance just below the 4% mark, 3.996, if I remember correctly, from our report. So what we see here, and if we go down that column that says 2013-14, as we see, we can go down there and we see we have a total fund balance a little over $4 million. Now, so that's where we stood as of June 30th of last year. Now, if we go right below it, we now start the calculations as to where we are now. So what you see above here with the revenue budget, appropriated fund balance, that's just the makeup of the budget. So you have a revenue budget of like $29.13 million. You have an appropriated fund balance of $1.15 million. Remember, fund balance is not revenue. So we see our total budget this year is $30,283,000. Okay, so can't exceed that amount of money. So the first thing to let you know is when you look at our revenues, we're a little short in a couple areas, but over in a couple areas, but pretty much we're right on spot with where we should be. But as we go below it, we see our estimated expenses, $28.8 million, which is a little over 95% of the budget being spent. And there's a couple reasons for that, and I'll go through them as we go through. But basically, no health, a month of health insurance we didn't pay this year, so I mean that's almost 0.8% of the budget, 1 month of health insurance. But there's some other factors, and we'll go through some of those. But we're seeing a surplus of a little under $200,000. So that $200,000, $193,460 is my estimate right now, which you can't go read further down because you see that 4% down there? That was actually from the prior year. What you want to do is scoot over to the next column, 4.54%. That's where I'm seeing where our total fund balance will be at the end of this year, which is above the limit. So it does appear that we could add more money to the fund balance, or there's other ways in which we can, approach this to ensure that we stay under that 4% mark. So as far as our fund balance is concerned, we look really well. And I want to go over a couple areas which are producing these expenditures, just to give you an idea as to some of the factors that are driving expenditures, and in some cases expenditures not materializing. And there's nothing in your book with this, so I'm just going to read off some of the things here. To give you an example, we've had some breakage this year with some teachers, custodians, teaching assistants who have left our employment during the year, so we've incurred some breakage. And I just get to the first one, Sheldon having somebody who this year retired. We have a new person in there, but we had breakage already this year. That breakage is already built into next year's budget, so there's no additional breakage. But so you got some breakage there, but at the same time, this has been a bad winter for snow. So usually where we get a lot of money back is, we put in overtime for snow removal, and a lot of times the past couple of years it really hasn't occurred, but as you know, this year is totally different. So their overtime budget's pretty much been eaten up, so there's not a whole lot of stuff there. But so the other things too, fuel oil, just to let you know, we're going to be using a lot of that budget. We'll be under the budget, but we're going to use most of that budget. It's just been, unfortunately, it's been a cold, long winter, and it hasn't stopped yet, as you know. So, we should be okay unless this cold just continues on and on. But as I see it right now, we're going to be under budget, but not by a whole lot. Electricity. I don't know if anybody's opened their most recent electrical bill, but if yours didn't go up, I don't know what happened to you, because the rates have gone through the roof. The delivery charge is still the same. Okay, so there's nothing changed there, but the usage amount, that has gone up a lot. And Sheldon, how much did it go up by? Oh, he just left. Hey, Sheldon. But, I mean, we were talking about it the other day because our actual bill came in and we were like, whoa, the rates have gone up quite a bit, and I think you're going to see it. But unfortunately, Dutchess County, as a homeowner, you get a surcharge now. In your next bill, you're going to have an excise tax and surcharge, which I think is about 6%.
I thought it was 3.7%.
3.7, okay. But, you know, the school district does not get hit with that charge because we're just going to pass it on to the taxpayer, so these, you know, we're a tax-exempt organization, so lucky along that way. So, you know, some savings there, but not the savings we typically see. Also, to let you know, we had we did the lighting project here, so that was $40,000 that was not anticipated, and I think they've completed that. They were supposed to complete it the day or the day before. So that's doing good. Also, some.
And that's going to save us money in the long term. But
oh yeah, it'll save us in the long
expenditure
term
in this year's budget.
Yeah. And I think the lighting looks really good. It's nice and clear out there, white. Also, we had savings where we hired a couple people this year, anticipating a July 1st beginning, but that didn't happen, so there's savings that got happened there. Also, with the teacher salaries, and as we know, we had a few retirements in the middle of the year, which is saving us money. But also at the same time, too, and that's something we changed in the budget for next year to put more expenditures to bring that 96% of spending the budget up higher, 97, 98%. So we're spending more of the budget, is that we have the people who are in the federal grants, that their monies have been allocated to the federal funds, which adds money to the general fund side. So that was some significant monies. We only ran half the student resource officer program, so base savings money there. That was taken out of the budget for next year, so it's still just the 1 day a week. Special education on the side with Richard and that, we have definitely had some savings, though we've had a couple students move into our school district recently. We still have, now the next year's budget, it's going up against that amount. So if we get additional amount, I mean, we still have some unanticipated slots, but unfortunately they're getting eaten up there, unfortunately. But you know, we need to educate our students for that. And then transportations, there's been savings. We're not transporting as many children to as many places this year, so that's created some savings on some bus routes. We had some additional savings for next year's busing because of the new bid contract that was awarded last time. Also, we had $35,000 allocated to BOCES buses, but none of our kids they have a shuttle that runs between the buildings, and we don't have anybody in the program this year, so that was a savings of $35,000. I did put money into the budget next year, like half of it. I did like $17,500, not knowing one way or the other, and that's just a matter of what students go to what programs down at BOCES, and if a person's at Salt Point, but also at the Beta site, and there's a shuttle that runs in between, and if it's just our kid, we pick up the entire thing. If there's 10 from Wappingers, 1 from us, we split it. It's divided by district, not how many kids you have on the bus. And also, one of the other big items that we saved this year is with health insurance. As you know, you may not know, is DHIC had what was called a premium holiday in December. So we don't pay for that portion of the DHIC members. People who are on MVP, we have to pay for them. They don't have no holiday. So we pay for them. So that saves us quite a bit of money, over $200,000. But in the end, when we look at the bottom line, there's $1.46 million that is not being spent in the budget. You have an appropriated fund balance of $1.15 million. So that gap there in the revenue shows we have a surplus this year of around $200,000. And as you know, we're already at the 4% mark, so we will definitely have to have some discussions about that. And I also wanted to bring you up to date on workers' compensation. When I told you last time that there was going to be some changes to workers' comp, and there are, and it's positive. Currently it's positive. Long-term outlook, who knows? Because I'm sure they'll be going back to the drawing board and they'll rewrite workers' comp how it's done in New York State. But currently what happened is they rewrote the laws for workers' comp and how it deals with it. And basically it has a lot more to do with funding future cost. And we don't have to set aside as much money as we previously did. 2 years ago, we had an unfunded liability with workers' comp of over $300,000. And we started to address that this summer by creating a reserve for workers' comp. Then the changes in the law. So we had a meeting about 2 weeks ago with our Right Risk Management, who administers the program. And we sat down, they sat down with us, going over the new laws and regulations. Our unfunded liability has dropped from $300,000, it got cut in half to about $150,000 based on this new way of calculating. And so also the other thing too, it's going more to a payroll-based system. And our industry is considered very safe. There's not, the maintenance men, they're the only people not considered safe, and the cafeteria people, but everybody else is considered, there's not too many accidents that happen to, teachers and teacher aides and administrators. But what has happened now, because it's more payroll-based, actually, our rates for next year dropped. And pretty low, and actually we would have had a negative. But the cooperative said, well, we still have that unfunded liability we have to address. And what they're doing is they're going to, it should take about 5 years to eliminate that unfunded liability. So they have a plan where we're paying about what we paid last year, but at the same time, we're eating away at that unfunded liability. So that in about 5 or 6 years, that should be gone, which is going to be very helpful as we go forward. So that's good news too. So, we have that $175,000 in the workers' comp reserve. I mean, it's not all needed there. I mean, there's still an unfunded liability there, so we still could put money into there, but we don't need as much as what is currently there. So I think those are some decisions that when the Finance Committee gathers again, we will discuss these things and then bring it to the full board for consideration when it comes to fund balance. And we do that every year when it comes to, looking at the fund balance. So we'll take a closer look at the next Finance Committee meeting, and they will probably make a recommendation to the board as to how to use fund balance, whether to increase it, decrease it, change the reserve amounts as we go forward into the next couple of years. So at least that's good news. It kind of offsets the bad news we had a little bit earlier.
Tom, I can't recall now, the parameters of use around changing a workers' compensation reserve fund.
The mechanism, there's two mechanisms. I'll talk with Tim Thomas just to make sure we would do it correctly. Is that I believe that what you can do is take a portion of that particular reserve and pay your workers' comp bill the next year. So of the $175,000, for example, we could take $50,000 out of that fund and pay our bill next year. So $50,000 coming out of the reserve, the rest coming out of the budget. So you'd be able to reduce the budget by that amount of money, knowing when you make the payment, part of it's going to be coming from the reserve, part's coming from the budget. I'll talk to him about that mechanism, how that works, because I remember one of those is you just, by board action, is to take it out of the workers' comp and put it into the just the unappropriated fund balance.
Okay.
And use it that way. I'll check with Tim to make sure what he feels is the best way to approach that if we want to use that reserve monies.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about the fund balance? And
No questions, Bob?
Again, we can cycle back to questions.
Oh, we can always
Yeah,
later.
right. Okay.
All right. Well, perhaps we ought to move to, I don't know if there...
Yeah, I mean, we have a moment where we have on the agenda public comment, but there'll be opportunities for administrators to speak. But anyone who'd like to, any comments from the public?
Well, there was, Sheldon, we had a question when you weren't here, and that was about... No, I know, this is a little warm.
Turn it down, we're spending too much money.
Well, it was about electricity, though, because we talked yesterday about the, or maybe it was 2 days or 3 days ago, that we talked about the utility bill we received from Central Hudson. And I did tell them that the delivery charge has not changed, it's the cost of the supply. And I didn't know what percentage increase the supply cost was to us.
Just so you know, I got an estimated bill, the estimated reading, so it's not an actual bill yet, but the supply cost, the total cost went up about 70% from estimate.
Wow.
70?
And what was just a spike.
Well, that also...
We hope it's a mistake.
It's a mistake, I just think it's just
That meeting was forgetting to turn all the lights off?
The next utility bill.
I'm not opening it.
So I guess there's really been a problem with natural gas, and the supply of natural gas is because of this cold. Natural gas prices have spiked, and our electricity comes from a number of places. Natural gas, less coal, but coal and nuclear power are the three typically in this area where we get our energy from. So if you have a problem with any one of those, I mean, nuclear is not going to have a problem, but if there's a spike in the price of coal or natural gas, that's just going to be reflected in your utility bills. And of course, when that crisis happens and every supply gets back, it never comes back down to where it was previously. So just has this natural order of increasing things. So, and the lighting project, I did tell them that, you know, the lighting project was in here. We'll have to do a budget transfer to cover that cost, but if I remember correctly, the other day you said it was going to be, did they complete it this week, or I think they had to order one part, two more lights to do? So we're just about done.
Up on the roof to do stoplights in the back of the building, but no, installation looks good.
Okay, good.
Payback, if we rates stay this high, payback will be probably
Definitely a lot less.
4 years.
But there'll be no way to figure it out. Just we've learned that from Johnson Controls. The energy performance contracts, so every year they give us a report to say, hey, here's the money, we justified ourselves. Yeah, but where those, you can't figure it out. This is a huge building. How can you say that has contributed to this savings? It's just impossible. It's an overall building. I mean, we've had a lot of savings over the years. I mean, from where we were, you know, before this, the big project here, that they tore out the heating and ventilation system, replaced it all in this building. I'll tell you what, it was a huge saving of money. You're going to recoup those savings over the years. And it's very comfortable now. But still more to do in the building. I don't want to say that it's all completely done. There's still more that can be done here to help with energy savings, but it's a long way. But
All right. Okay, so no members of the public want to comment at all or ask a question? Then we'll move on to our expenditure projections to date.
So I draw your attention to the document that says Rhinebeck Central School District 2014-15 budget development process. And the first item is rollover budget. You have a few other iterations of this in your binders, but each time we give you another iteration, it's with another draft of the budget. And what we do and will continue to do until we're at the point of adopting a budget to go to the voters is give you another set of additions and deletions to the prior draft budget. And hopefully there'll be more deletions than additions, but there is a back and forth. So just to recap for anybody who might be watching this on Panda or YouTube or following it in some other way, we started off back in the very beginning of January, actually before January, with a rollover budget that that showed a 3.95% budget to budget increase. The first draft budget dated January 6, 2014 showed a budget increase percentage of 3.29%. The second draft budget, which is at the bottom 2/3 of that page in front of you and goes over to the second page, shows a budget increase of 2.13% budget to budget. And then Tom starts to add in information regarding tax levy increase and limits. The third draft, the most recent draft, is what starts about halfway down the second page where it says additions to the second draft budget at the 3/8/14 board workshop. And I'm going to let Tom quickly take you through those additions and deletions, which will bring us to the last page and where we are right now in the process.
Just to let you know, you get a full rendition here. This is just going to summarize it. You're never going to be able to pull out of here the changes that are here because it's just impossible. But you got another full rendition of draft 3. The first was we got 2 additions to this budget, but they have offsets, which is going to actually bring the budget down. But the first one, other expenses in the high school. This is the AP exams. That was something that was added during the budget process at the end last year. So it wasn't a part of the beginning process, and something we realized Dr. Davenport did is, he realized, oh, I didn't put them in my budget this year, and that was, so he went back to the drawing board, he went back in, and you'll see like the first 6 or 7 on the other side, the deletions right below, he found money within his budgets to offset paying for the AP exams. So we will continue to pay for the AP exam, the fee for that. Those people who are on free and reduced were able to get them for free, but for those who have to pay, the district will be picking up that tab. So that's number 1. Below is library automation software. When Steve came on board, he was looking at all aspects, and one of the things he saw that he used in Newburgh was, I believe it was Follett, library automation system. And so he looked at it and brought it to the librarians and the principals to take a look at it, and they liked it a lot, and it's a lot cheaper. It's even cheaper in the first year, and that includes the software, the installation, the migrating of all the data and everything. So altogether about $8,500 for the first year. Annual maintenance is about $3,000. So if you look down below, there's a line that says BOCE services, $15,300. All right, that's the cost each and every year for the software we use at the library. So already in the first year, it's about $7,000 less, and as we go forward, it's going to be $12,000 less per year. So we're looking forward to that, to do that. So those are the 2 additions.
About workers' comp?
Yeah, so getting on the deletions end, like the first 5 or 6 of them deal with the AP exams where Dr. Davenport found offsets within his budget. The BOCE service we talked about at the library, and the next one is the workers' comp. Even with the changes that I discussed earlier about workers' comp, and that we're fighting that unfunded liability that we have also, in addition to it, we were still able to bring our workers' comp down by $13,500 from what the second draft had. So it's overall from the prior year, it's about a 2% increase from the prior year, but I was anticipating a 10. So the workers' comp has gotten some good news. So we're able to subtract $13,500 out of there. And if we go over to the next page, overall we were able to reduce a little over $20,000 out of this budget. We have a new current budget of $30,909,020, which is a 2.06% budget to budget increase. Now, this creates and generates a 2.45% tax levy increase. Okay? Our maximum allowable was $287,000. Our maximum allowable tax levy is 191, which means we got to get from 245 to 191, and that delta is
On the levy side.
on the levy side. So the delta is a little over, it's just a little short of $136,000. Now, there's still some things that we do not know yet. DHIC has not come up with their rates yet. I budgeted 7% there for that. I do not believe it will come above that. But every percentage point below that, we save about $35,000, $36,000. So next week is our DHIC meeting. I will know a lot more, Wednesday afternoon as to where we're going with a rate action there. March 15th, which is actually on a weekend, so I guess it's March 17th, is going to be the final, well, I'm going to say it's the final day, because the teacher can hand in a letter of resignation anytime they want to, actually. But that's the deadline to be paid for their sick day buyout. So within the next 2 weeks, we'll know if there's any additional retirements. We did get one on the Annie side we know about. I haven't had time to really figure it out. Breakage on the Annie side is nowhere near as much as what it would be on the teacher side. It's not that big of a delta between top step and bottom step, and that's usually eaten up by health insurance, because now you're bringing another health insurance contract on. Even though you're losing the salary, you're bringing on a new health insurance contract. So it kind of eats into whatever breakage you may get. But sometimes there is breakage, and we'll work it out.
We also, the state aid figures aren't finalized. We won't know that until, if the last several years are any indication, we ought to know that by April 1st. The state hasn't had an on-time budget for the last, I think, three years or thereabouts. So, that hopefully that figure will be firmed up by April 1st. So there's still some moving parts here, which is why wasn't ready to turn on the gas jets in my house when I found out about this thing, because and the other thing is that the change in the way the comptroller's office is interpreting the tax levy limit, the carryover part of the tax levy law, is that you'll recall from our discussions last year that carryover could only be used in the following year.
Yeah.
You only had one you couldn't carry it over for multiple years. So in a sense, it's a one-shot revenue. Well, now that one-shot revenue is gone. So there are lots of options in terms of a one-shot planning that could address that deficit. But I don't even want to bring you recommendations in that regard until some of these other expenditures are worked out. It may or may not even be necessary. We just don't know as we're sitting here on March 8th, but we have another 4 to 6 weeks at the max to have some of these other things play out and see how they fall. So
I just have a question, Ed. As you sort of tighten your budget to make room for the AP exams, it says here there's a code for equipment in the high school instrumental that was basically eliminated. So I'm just wondering if there are consequences to that we might see later, or is it just...
Fortunately, that was for a baritone saxophone, and with Mr. Kendall's help, we were able to purchase that out of this year's budget.
Oh, okay.
So we're covered in that.
Fantastic, great.
For a lot less than the $6,000, too, which is really good.
All right, very good. All right, are there other questions right now about, this is a key document that's going to guide us forward, these last few numbers on this page. We're $135,000, well, $136 almost above the maximum allowable tax levy limit, but obviously there's some things still in play. Lisa?
Recognizing that there are still some items in play, and that you don't want to commit to exactly how you're going to recommend bridging the gap yet, is one of in view of the conversation that, or the presentation that Tom just made about the
Fund balance?
Fund balance, sorry, thank you. Thank you, it's a little early in the morning.
For all of us.
Is one of the things that you're anticipating, recommending, to use some of that overage in the fund balance that you anticipate?
I would think so. I mean, the one thing that I worry about is at some point we have to dial back on the fund balance. You know, we've been able to replenish it, but I think if that number continues to grow, because right now it's $1.15 million, okay, that at some point when it need to be dialed back, it's going to create a real big issue, because when you dial it back, how do you make up that loss of, I want to say revenue, because it's not revenue, but how do you make up that loss there, that 1 year that fund balance isn't there to support it? And I can't go out to the taxpayers anymore like you could in the past.
Right.
You can't do that anymore.
Because you've got a tax levy.
You've got
right
the limit there. And so we have to be very careful how we approach that. And really be very thoughtful about going forward a couple of years. And that's why we try to make the projection and try to make that as realistic as possible, so that can guide us, not just looking at next year, but looking at the next few years. Because, like I always say, this school district will be here 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question is whether it'll be the Rhinebeck Central School District or the Dutchess County School District. Yeah. We don't know yet, but but these buildings will still be here. This community will still be here. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to put any, go overreaching too far, and then ed programs are not able to support in the years going out, and that's my concern.
Understood, but for the short term, the non-100-year view, where you have an excess of fund balance that we are mandated not to maintain.
Exactly.
We have to do something with that. And I'm just trying to get confirmation, I think you've given it, that one of the things that you are thinking that you are likely to do is to recommend using some portion of that overage.
I would think so, yeah.
On the budget side to, bring that number down.
Correct.
I'll hedge just a little bit on that and say that is certainly a possibility in combination with some other things to address that problem. But at this point, I really, there are enough other moving parts that could be significant enough that I wouldn't want to sit here and say that's a likely scenario. I think it's a possibility. We're going to put it all together in a way that's that's prudent and responsible and isn't wild and crazy. I think we'll be okay. And there are some moving parts. For example, if the state were to decide to eliminate, or to use Tom's term, dial back the gap elimination adjustment, that's $450,000 at the maximum that we're losing every year. And for us, compared to some other school districts, that's a drop in the bucket, but it's a good chunk of money for us, and that would obliterate that. Right. So I mean, there's still a lot of stuff going on out there. So, but I think we have some options.
I appreciate your clarification in the hedging, and I think it's fair. But for me, it's important to hear at least that this is something that's under consideration, as opposed to, no, we would never even consider recommending that.
It's definitely under consideration.
So let's take a minute. You have a sheet of about state aid, our state aid numbers. So why don't we just, maybe you could just talk about that a little bit. And the gap elimination adjustment is something that a lot of school districts are dealing with now, and so highlighting just how much that is, that's like halfway down right here.
Yeah, actually the second bunch.
At the bottom. Okay.
It's actually 424, 928.
Right.
And we have been lobbying our legislator, and I would hope continuing to lobby our legislators about that gap elimination adjustment, and especially in light of the fact that the state's gone from a $10 billion deficit to a $2 billion surplus that our governor is now proposing giving to taxpayers under a set of circumstances in the form of a check in November, right before election time. Certainly the need for a gap elimination adjustment is over. I mean, we're generating $2 billion in surplus.
There's no gap.
As a state, there's no gap to adjust. Yet they continue to adjust, so.
Yeah, I'd rather have the gap elimination restored as opposed to homeowners getting checks, because in the long run, that gap elimination reduces our tax levy below what they're going to get back.
Right.
So to me, I'd rather have that, and then it being each and every year. I don't like and first of all, that it hasn't been approved yet.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet, but even if it does, I just worry about the years going out trying to meet those standards and to be able to reduce the overall cost within our county by 1%. That's, unless they can put some legislation in there to help us do that, it's going to be very hard to do. Very hard to do.
So just you know, to clarify, the $424,000 listed here under gap elimination is how much less state aid we're getting since it was 2000. I mean, this is this year, right? Since 2004 or 8.
Yes, it started back in 2004 with the foundation aid.
Right.
And a couple years later, when they got into, you know, the $10 billion deficit, that's when the gap elimination came in.
Right. So we're reducing school district budgets in order to make up for that deficit.
Correct.
So
Yep.
in this year, it's $424,000 less that we're getting. And I know all the schools in Dutchess County are trying to collect their data on how much they've lost over this series of years in their budgets. So this year, our state aid, what's the total here?
It would be
a little over $3 million.
$146,000.
Right.
Which is about $32,000 less than the previous year. And the main culprits for that are going to be our BOCES aid has gone down, and that's really just a function of us not using BOCES as much. So reducing our expenditures with BOCES is reducing the amount of state aid we're getting back. That also gets into the excess cost aids too. These are dealt with the special education students, where we get a percentage of tuition above and beyond an average. So they figure it out and say, okay, it should cost this much to educate somebody, let's say $30,000, it's costing you $36,000. That $6,000 difference, we get a percentage of that. That's excess cost aid.
Okay.
Well, we have fewer special ed students this year than the prior year. So therefore, we're going to get less money in excess cost. But also, you're going to see that on the expenditure side. You're seeing the expenditure side and the budget side of special ed has gone down more than our aid's gone down. So even though we're getting less aid, we're also expending a lot less on that particular side of things. Our software, library, and textbook aid is going down. And that's because we have fewer students. That's tied to the student. So it's a number multiplied by the number of students you have. So as you know, our enrollment has been going down. So each year we'll receive less and less and less of that. That's just that's a function of enrollment. And then we have the high cost aid, or high tax aid. That was eliminated last year, then restored at the end. This year they didn't even bother taking it out. So that was just good to see that he learned that wasn't going to last, because that's even though we get the high tax aid, and there's maybe one or two other districts around the area that get it, Long Island, they got whacked by it, and they want that budget wasn't going anywhere until that was restored. So that was restored. That's mainly a Long Island aid. So as we look for, like I say, we're looking to receive about $32,000 less than last year, but this is based on the governor's proposal. we'll have to wait and see when the next one comes out to see if we get an increase, stay the same, go down. I wouldn't expect it to go down.
We budgeted for the governor's proposal.
Right. We budget for what we think is going to be the lowest amount we receive.
The line in state aid for academic enhancement, is that for schools that go to longer days, or I know that there's been
I don't know.
support being forwarded for school districts that contemplate these measures, having a longer school year, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if that's what.
I don't know, but I'll look into it
Okay.
and
We're getting
find out what it's about, because
Yeah.
And similarly, we have a 0 for universal pre-kindergarten.
Oh, yeah.
In spite of all the chatter around the state in that regard, so. Doesn't look like that's a priority in the governor's budget for us.
Do you know what the smart schools allocation?
yes, and I did want to get to that. And thank you for bringing that up, because you see that down there, the $277,000. This is an initiative that, if it goes through and approved, on the November ballot, there will be a referendum on there to borrow, I think it was $2 billion.
Right.
For
Technology
upgrades for school districts. Now, and $277,000 sounds like a lot, because we're a wealthy district. We're not even getting close to what a lot of other school districts are getting. Would get. I mean, it's just looking at the county itself, the amount that Arlington gets is going to be the same amount that Poughkeepsie gets. They're very similar to each other, but Arlington has 2.5 times the amount of students, at least 2.5, if not probably even more than that. But their smart schools allocations are they're very close to each other. They're looking like, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but it was significant, like $6 million.
But that's if this ballot
And
is
that's if.
it's on the ballot in November, and if it passes, I believe that NYSBA opposes this because it's not a really solid way to fund school needs is through a ballot proposition.
No, I agree with you.
And, once again, I would just say that it's the governor not taking responsibility for adequately funding schools, but rather creating mechanisms that have people within the state competing against each other over funding schools.
I think we were told by our legislator also that she didn't think that that proposition would even get on the ballot because there were other priorities that they thought would go on a priority over that.
So it's interesting that it's listed here with
Right.
the amount of money, but it's such a political football right now, yeah.
It's just, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to ask the
Yep.
question.
Yep.
Are we using that number in any way, shape, or form in our?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
First of all, that referendum wouldn't be to November. And then if it did pass,
It would be for the following year.
then they have to go out and borrow the money, so we wouldn't see it to the following year. Yeah.
Right. So Tom, are there any other revenue documents here that we should be looking at?
Yeah, there is. There's really not much to look at, because it really has, our revenues
Sorry to say.
are few. We just don't have a
We
whole
don't
lot of
collect a couple
revenue.
bucks at the basketball game?
Each board member will be issued a tin cup, so whatever you can get would be much appreciated.
Now, a few years ago, we used to do that. Well, not the tin cup, but we used to have a ticket taker. It used to cost us more to have the ticket taker than the money that came in. So it was like, why are we doing this? Let's not do this. This isn't helping.
Let's take a quick look at
So
this.
we'll take a quick look. This is your,
Draft budget.
this is
Yeah.
in your third draft of the revenue side of the budget.
It says real property taxes and tax items in the upper left-hand corner.
Correct. And as we take a look, and we'll start with that first one, with the real property taxes. I know we discussed it earlier, but, we see it at 2.45%. And we need to get that number down to 1.91. That's for that $136,000. All right. As we come further down, we have payments in lieu of taxes, and that was a part of that tax cap formula. But we are seeing a 5% increase to that, and actually in a few years that's going to start to ramp up quite a bit more. But the tax cap has a mechanism where it doesn't, it is tax levy neutral. If your pilots go up by $1,000, your tax levy's got to go down by $1,000. So it's, you know, the star itself, we do get star A, there's no doubt about it. We have no idea what that number is yet. Everything's based off on the real property taxes. Once it's determined, then we make a shift in the revenues for the star relief.
So we don't even know for this year, for this one?
No, no, and it's all based upon your tax levy. Basically, the other thing that people got to realize over the years, and it's changed a bit with the star tax reimbursement. First of all, people needed to re-sign up for that. So anybody watching on YouTube, you still have time to put in there. As much as they put a deadline of December 31st, there is no deadline anymore. It's, you can even, our understanding, even after you get your tax bill and you realize you didn't get your star, you can go down to your town and go through it. And I expect next year this board will see a lot of tax changes, and not so much the certs, but those tax refunds where they're going to pay me the money because that's what the bill says, but I'm going to be turning around and giving them back what their star would have been. So we'll be coming, I believe, quite a bit to the board next year with that. You see it typically when they reassess. Reassessment, that following year, you get all sorts of things. This is probably going to drive me more. My understanding, about 90% of the people signed up from the previous year. And I know that Meg is looking to see if we can get a list of those who haven't signed up so we can let them know, hey, you haven't signed up, here's another opportunity, you know. Because that's one that doesn't cost the school district a penny. That money comes out of Albany. We're sending the money up there, and I look for every way to get that money back to you. So, that's where we are with the star. The interest has been pretty much around the $40,000. I don't want to go too far off of that. As we go down to the next section, charges for services, that's where we have non-resident tuitions. That's where we have some students who do not live within the district who have decided to come here and will pay their tuition at the normal rates. There's no break on that. So we have 3 or 4 kids who are currently in our school that are from outside the district. Our next one is continuing education. We have eliminated that program, so I took that out completely. So that went down to 0. Admissions, I should get rid of that because we don't do that anymore. But the next section, use of money and property. I have scaled back the interest and earnings by $10,000. They're just not generating. Rates have fluctuated a little bit, but pretty much staying pretty negative. I think everybody knows what their rates are looking like using their own bank accounts to determine. There isn't much out there when it comes to interest. Rental of real property, kept that the same. As we get down to the next section, sale of property and compensation and loss, insurance recoveries. Here is a place that we possibly could do something. We have monies that are with the workers' compensation, with workers' comp. Monies that were refunded to the workers' comp from the New York State's comp board. It's what's called a second injury fund. So if you get hurt, they also look back in your employment to see whether or not you've been hurt in the past. And sometimes they charge that other employer because they say, well, this is because of that injury from back then. Our money in that program has increased over the years, so I could increase that $40,000 a little bit. But that's going to be like, you can do that for a year or two and then that's going to be gone. And then you're going to have to drop it. You know, if you increase it to $60,000, use it all up, that's $60,000 you don't have next year that where's it coming from?
Right.
That's something you want to plan around, because as you go forward, there's really only going to be 2 sources of revenue in this school district that are going to actually increase your ability in the budget. Your tax levy is your tax levy, and I don't want to talk about that because that's going to be capped, and that is capped. But 2 areas that aren't going to be capped, potentially could have increases, is interest. As you see, we're only earning $40,000, $50,000 in interest. When I first got here years ago, we were talking $350,000, $400,000 a year. It's going to be nice when those rates get back to where they are, because that's going to be able to drive more program for you at the cost of nobody. And the second area is going to be state aid. whether or not, as soon as the state can get on better footing and can do surpluses, we'll start seeing more state aid. But if they're stagnant up there, we're going to be stagnant in state aid. I'm really concerned about the state aid piece as to other commitments the state has to make besides us, and that's on the social services end. Picking up more of the Medicaid payments, picking up more social service type of things, and that takes away from the school district. It's how fast those costs increase on their side. If it increases quickly, that means we're not going to get more state aid. So if they can able to keep those costs in check, hopefully any new type of monies will come to the school district as opposed to going to those programs. That's that area. The next section is miscellaneous, refund of BOCES aided services. We just got our check the other day. It was for over $104,000. I budgeted $100,000. But those monies are generated by BOCES. We pay for their services throughout the year. At the end of the year, they go through and they look at their fund balance and say, okay, you gave us $40,000 to educate this child in this classroom, and in the end it only cost us $35,000, so we're going to give you back your $5,000. So that's what that refund of BOCES aided services is. The next area is refund of prior year expenses, and those are generated in various different types of ways, getting refunds for insurance purposes, and we've been recently getting the past year or two, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, because it's increased quite a bit, and that is due to, I'm trying to remember which refund, I'll have to look that up, why we increased that to $30,000. And then other unclassified, as you know, the MTA payroll tax, that was eliminated, and you don't budget for donations. Donations come in, they come in. Next side is the state aid. That matches up to our state aid runs currently. As you see, it's a little uptick over last year. It's just that we were a little bit under budget when it finally came in. You know, that we're actually receiving a little bit more in state aid than what was projected. Medicaid reimbursements, that started up and is rolling again. I don't recommend that we increase or decrease that at all. That's a very, until we get through a few more years of that, I mean, I'm not so comfortable. I mean, they're really looking over everybody's shoulder now at that, and boy, you make one mistake, they take it away from you. And so I don't want to, we had an audit done by our local BOCES, not Ulster BOCES came over and did, was it Ulster BOCES? Yeah, Ulster BOCES came over and looked at it, said you guys are doing a good job, keep it up. So far so good. But they're always coming down with those changes. It seems like every month we're getting some type of an update and, you know, do this, do that, do this. And it's like, I'm sure you're saying it a lot yourself. You know, it's like, huh, what? We almost at the point have to have a medical biller on our side to understand some of this stuff. And luckily we do have Lucette doing a good job over there. So Medicaid, I wouldn't change anything with that. The interfund transfers, the first one is special aid, and that special aid is from our federal grants. And the federal grants, a portion of those grants we do as administrative cost. So that's really just the maintenance of those programs by the business office. Those monies get transferred over at the end of the year. And that number's crept up a little bit. And the next one, interfund transfer, this is from debt service. We have over the past couple of years transferred $120,000 if needed. And that's another thing. That's another way to get your fund balance down, is not transfer those monies and just decide not to do it. Keeps the money in the debt service right where it is. Don't you need it, don't use it. Like last year, we did not transfer the money. We didn't need it. And that's an option we'll have this year. Now, I said we had a potential surplus of $200,000. If I don't transfer the $120,000, that surplus can go down to $80,000. So that's another way that we can also look at it. It says don't do the transfer. That way that surplus shrinks because it's a revenue we didn't pull in. And then the next line is appropriated fund balance, $1.15 million. That is not a revenue. Okay, just to let you know, that's not new money. There was a school district not too far from here who counted that as revenue. And boy, that hurt them humongously because they ended up in a deficit because they didn't understand that that was not a revenue. So, questions on the side. And here you do see down here at the bottom that we have that shortfall of just under 136,000.
Any questions on this? Diane?
Just the real property tax projections, do we have any sense, or does this include increased revenue from development in the community with the hospital project and with the gardens and?
Now, they're just looking at it at levy to levy, meaning what was your total levy last year versus what was next year. The more that you bring on is going to reduce the overall tax rate. Which, even though the levy might be going up 1.91%, that tax rate may only be 1.5%, depending on how much. Now, they have a 0.7. Remember, we had a growth factor of 0.7? You would anticipate that there's almost a 0.7% increase on people who will be paying next year. So that should drive everybody's tax rates down by 0.7. It should. It's not a guarantee. But theoretically, that's what it should be doing. So if we come up with a 191, but we got 0.7 of new value out there on properties, the tax rate should go up by 1.21%, theoretically, for the homeowner. But you can't guarantee that. That's why they do it levy to levy. There are some school districts that try to figure that out, and they get themselves into a whole lot of trouble, because equalization rates change on them, the amount of assessments change, because assessments aren't locked in for another couple weeks. You know, so it's going to be interesting to see. But I would anticipate, like you say, you know, where did that 0.7 growth happen? I think part of it was the hospital. Part of that was put onto the rolls, which was part of that 0.7. Because you look around, yeah, there's building going on, but you think of, you know, not that much building going on. But actually, when you look around, there's some going on. There's definitely some going on. You know, and it's a matter of when they come on the rolls, too. You know, what the, and I can't remember the valuation date off the top of my head. I can't remember if it's April 1st or whatever. Is like you see construction going on, and even though it may not be completed, it's not on the rolls yet, or just a portion's on the roll. It's really not till it's really completed. It's not to the following year that it really comes onto the rolls at its full assessed value.
Okay.
Tom, I also want to just point out historically, with just like a general comment from the past couple of years, it looks like this year's budget, the state aid is less than 10%, just under, of our total revenues.
Yeah, we've been.
And that's decreased over time. We only have historically 2 previous years where it looks like it was just over 10% or.
Yeah, you don't have the budget.
It was over 10%, but. You know, I think there were years past where it was, you know, 12,
we were near 12,
13% of our revenues, but now we can see that declining, so we have to raise our money through the tax levy. So
that's what happens
as
when
you have to limit the tax levy, we're also getting reduced aid. Just another mechanism by which, you know, sort of analyzing how the budget is developed and the revenues come in. Okay, any other questions on the revenues on this document? All right. Do people want to take any kind of a little break or just storm right into the review of the current budget proposal and potential adjustments?
I think we should just keep going.
Oh. Okay.
This side of the table will keep going, this side of the table will take a break.
All right, why don't we take like really 5 minutes, okay? I mean really 5 minutes, so I'm going to be back here in 5 minutes, okay?
It's going to start whether you're there or not.
I heard that.
Turn the camera off.
Now we move on to discussion review of the current budget proposal in the context of potential adjustments. Joe, I'll turn it over to you, but I'm sure that there's a document. Is it? I guess there's no new document, right? It's in your board packet.
Yeah, we've been, I think, over most of the documents up to this point so that you have a good idea of where we're at this point. This is typically the part of the meeting where we would spend some time either asking questions or raising relevant issues. We do have, and I want to reemphasize our appreciation for our administrative team being here today, that there are a few times in the history of this district's annual cycle of business where they're all in the same room at the same time, unless they're meeting with me, and that's a whole other dark place to be. But they're here, they're awake by now, and they're here to not only listen to the discussion and get a sense of what your concerns and questions are, but also, to the extent that they can, to answer your questions. So they're an invaluable resource that we typically will not gather together in one place throughout the rest of the budget cycle, unless, of course, you request that we do, and they will, I'm sure, be accommodating. But this is kind of the opportunity to say we've got them at our beck and call for the next hour and a half or so to answer questions of things that are in the normal part of the budget, things that are on the wish list, quote unquote wish list, prioritized items. This is a great opportunity to get those questions answered, or to ask about, things like enrollment at the elementary school, or things that have come up as perennial issues from year to year. So have at it, I guess, and Deirdre will direct the question.
And just to refer to, we got this at our last board meeting, a district-wide list of 2014-15 potential programs and services. I know that list often generates a lot of discussion, and while we still need to get below the tax levy limit in our budget, given, so how much really may or may not be available is a little uncertain at this point. But I think as, what we have a month before we are scheduled to adopt a budget, if the opportunity presents itself with changes in, we may have some additional retirements with the DHIC costs, we're not certain about that with state aid costs. We might have a little bit of and the use of fund balance or other reserves. There might be some leeway, and it also depends on how important these potential programs and services are that people feel like they want to find the money to fund things. But even given the uncertainty with how much we'll have available in the budget, this is a good opportunity to ask questions about anything that Joe has presented to us as potential items. So, Lisa.
Okay. Well, I like to direct a question to Steve, who I'm glad to see actually exists. He's
the phantom administrator.
Yes. As you may know, at least some of our budget discussions and meetings has been about the tech enhancements that have been in development at the administrative level, and that we've been hearing something about in the course of the past several meetings. And I'd like to ask you whether, based on the planning that you are now doing and the discussions that you are having with Joe and the other administrators, whether you believe that the level of funding for those projects in the budget that's under discussion is adequate for what your plans are.
Okay. Well, there's two factors involved, and that is, of course, everybody would love, and I almost was going to speak up in the discussion earlier about the $2 billion proposal that possibly would go on the ballot. There's a double-edged sword when you do something like that. If you infuse a tremendous amount of money all at once, the problem is that the sustainability factor starts to play into that. I've been involved in districts where a capital project has gone out, a lot of things came in, and then 5 years later, 6 years later, you're looking at, replacing all of this stuff again, or upgrading and those kinds of things. So what you want to do is start to build into your budget cycle a sustainability factor where you do things incrementally so that, one, you build capacity with staff, because you, to take on the entire staff at one time is a large undertaking to do that, to transform the classroom across the entire district. So what you want to do is be able to do that incrementally and then create a cycle. And I usually recommend a 5 to 6 year cycle of a replacement plan. One that, and this is an example, this isn't one necessarily that's cast in stone, but you may have a cycle where it's 4 years that you deal with the educational components, 3 grades at a time, let's say. You got 12 grades within a system, and you do that. Then the 5th year is a infrastructure year, where you replace switches and things that are behind the scenes. That way, you're able to come back to the first year, again, that has not been touched in 5 years, and be able to address that again. And so as you're able to replace equipment or technology, and technology will have changed quite a bit by that time. You know, so yeah, would I like more money in the budget? Absolutely, everybody would like that. But I think there's also a reality that you have to do that, you know, doing fewer things well, I think, is a better approach, so that you really build the capacity of the staff as you incrementally bring those changes along. That addresses that or not?
Partially.
Okay.
If I can just sort of amplify based on what you just said, do you think that, based on what we've got in the budget for the coming school year, that the things that you would want to do in the staged way that you just talked about will be doable, or are there things that you are thinking, based on the CELT audit, based on my own understanding, there are things that we really need to do that we're really not going to be able to do, or we're going to have to push out farther than ought to be pushed out because of the way funding levels are in the budget?
Yeah. The issues that we have some short-term problems that we are facing right away, and the immediacies have to be addressed, and that is particularly at the elementary school. The machines there are of a vintage that no longer can be supported. The XP platform is no longer being supported or recognized. This is going to be open source at that point, which lends itself to a tremendous amount of vulnerability for the district and for anybody having XP machines. We have protocols in place for the XP machines in this building only because they're a newer vintage, and we're able to put on what's called a deep freeze software. So I don't want to elaborate too deeply with this, but basically we have to take care of the elementary school immediately, and replacing all those XP machines within that building, it's teacher stations and student stations, and there's a variety of ways of doing it. We could just simply replace a one-to-one replacement, but the vertical team is addressing actually on Monday how best to do that. Is it going to be laptop cards? Is it going to be a tablet device? Is it going to be, is it going to be, instead of every room having 5 or 6 computers, are we going to have carts and say, okay, 3rd grade, you're going to share this cart, and we're going to, or do they do the cart there and then the teachers take 5 from that cart each day, or whatever form that we take. And that's a grade level decision, that's a building level decision that needs to be made there. So there's a variety of ways, but right now the priority is that. The priority is to get Wi-Fi across the district. Much of the technology that that is recommended for the educational market is Wi-Fi dependent, and so we need to prepare people for that. And so we need to do that in both buildings. So the district has committed itself to addressing that, and as a matter of fact, this week we'll be doing the final touches on an RFP that we'll be submitting to Tom and Joe to review, to go out for the Wi-Fi network, really an enterprise level network. And so as far as the funding to do that, I like the implementation of, doing it incrementally at that level. Are there some other things we need to look at? Yeah, we need to look at some things enterprise-wide, such as our email system. Our email system right now is Exchange 2003, and do the math, we're way overdue to upgrade that. As a matter of fact, my most recent conversation with Michelle was, it's not a question of if it's going to fail, it's a matter of when. So we need to look at those things, and so there's some infrastructure pieces. Our filtering software is another area that sometimes you find prohibitive for teachers in the classroom. So we want to be able to target that. So there are some minor improvements there that we have to do, but our major improvements have to be in the area of our network. We just had an audit done by a private consultant group that came in and did that, and we have a 15-year-old system, essentially. And as I described it to the faculty this past week, our pipe to the internet is very wide. It's very fast. It's like a 5-lane highway. The problem is that our wiring and our switches and our hubs in each of the classrooms turn that 5-lane into a 1-lane bridge and really begins to slow things down. And so what happens is that the adverse effect of that is that teachers become frustrated. And when they become frustrated, they begin not to trust. And when they don't trust, they don't use. And so we have to really, my concern with the plan is that the system becomes responsive immediately, and that we have the staffing and support to be able to respond to those concerns immediately. Because there's, as you indicated in the self-report, there's an aversion. I don't have enough support in my classroom. I don't trust my technology, and it works, but it's clunky, and nobody wants to be in front of 20 students and then have this thing come to a grinding halt. And so those are the areas we want to address. We need to make it so that teachers can trust it, and then when they do, then their capacity will begin to build rather rapidly, because they'll feel like, oh, I can do this now, and provide the in-service and the internal support so that they're able to feel comfortable with that.
Okay, so again, circling back to the budget part of this.
Yes.
Have we planned properly to be able to do what you've just described?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, just if I could amplify a little bit, just due to the fact that that we brought Steve on board mid-year, we purposely did not spend much, if any, of our hardware budget this year. We were waiting for the person who was going to be occupying that position to come on board. So we have the amount budgeted in our current year budget for hardware that we will be spending, as well as a comparable amount in the 14-15 budget that we're developing now that we'll be using to address many of those needs. Again, in a perfect world, we'd have unlimited money, but Steve has also brought up a great point that if we do everything at the same time, then in 5 years we'll be sitting here having the same conversation because it'll all be obsolete at the same time. So I think he's got a really good vision in terms of staging this over the course of years. But I think, and again, I would ask Steve to disagree with me publicly if I'm not if what I'm saying is not accurate from his perspective, but I think we have a reasonable number of resources, both from current year budget and what we're planning currently for next year that's already in the budget to make a good step forward with the things that he's just described. We have grant money to do the wireless work, so that's not even a budget item. It's going to be funded out of a grant that we received in the not too distant past. So we're planning on doing that work this summer. Once we were holding off on the wireless piece, waiting for the leadership that Steve is bringing to the district as to why we need it. Last thing we want to do is spend money on a wireless network if we don't really, and then find a way to use it, as opposed to saying these are the needs, and part of the need is having a wireless network for these devices to operate on. So, I think our one thing we're looking at and talking at, and still, I don't think we still come to a bottom line, is one of the things that was pointed out in the CELT audit was the need for additional technical support beyond the one person we have, and especially if we're bringing on laptop carts, iPad carts, or whatever, that's just going to ramp up the need for technical support. So the three of us have met a couple of times, and will continue to meet, especially as the budget development cycle grinds on, to see if there's some way we can repurpose some monies. We're looking at contracting out for these services versus having our own person in-house for these services. That's still in play, but we're trying to make it happen within the confines of what we have to work with right now. We haven't closed the book on that particular tech support piece, but we're working on it. So we'll keep you up to date as this plays out over the course of the next several weeks or month or whatever. But otherwise, I think we're going to see some significant forward progress on all these fronts: hardware, tech support, professional development. Across the district. I think Steve's taken us in a good direction, so I feel good about that.
Okay. Other questions? Diane?
I have several. Do you want me to do them all at one time? Or skip
Depends.
around? Joe, I don't know if you can answer this. The document, the sports document, is the cost for like crew swimming and lacrosse, is that the total cost of the program, or is that the cost that the district pays?
Well, yeah, that's the cost to the district. That's what we paid out. And so, to give you an example, because there are differences, like swimming. I mean, that was the total cost to us that we paid out. They refund us the money, so they cover the cost there.
And some of it was donated.
Some is
right. I'm saying is that.
But that's the total cost.
That's what we're paying.
That we paid out as a school district.
Okay, so like, I don't know, the total cost is saying like $9,800. So that's what the district paid, not what we were reimbursed by the booster group.
Right, that's what we paid out for their program.
So okay. So the total cost could be higher, right?
Crew is a good example because it's more dramatic.
Okay.
That amount on that worksheet for crew is nowhere close to what the total cost of running that program is.
Okay. But so these figures are what the district is
That's correct.
Right. When it comes to crew, I mean, that's for the coaches. It's for the transportation of the students. I don't know if there's any uniforms that year. I mean, that's basically what it is. But as far as purchasing the boats, maintaining the boats, storing the boats, the school district is not doing any of that at all. That is something that crew is doing themselves. When it comes to lacrosse, that's the entire cost of the program: coaching, transportation, equipment, supplies, and materials. Swimming, same thing. That's the cost of the coach. We didn't have any transportation. I mean, they transported their own children, so that daily to the practice to bars.
There is an amount on here.
There is. That happened to deal with coaches having to go to meets. All right, so that's what that transportation is. That is not transportation for the students. That's really for the coaches themselves who had to travel here, there, and everywhere. I think we had to travel. I can't remember that, Ithaca or something of that nature for the state meet or something of that nature. So that's what you're seeing there.
Can I cycle back just to, because now I've got it. This has raised a question in my mind. If we just look at lacrosse as an example, a sport which we started out by funding through donations. In current year budget, we'd increased the amount of money that we were contributing, therefore lowering the amount that we needed in donations to run that sport. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong, the total cost of that program this past year was $13,479.
Correct.
Okay. Was the district contributing $13,479?
No, lacrosse did.
The whole thing?
The whole thing.
Okay. This year, it's $5,000 less, at least theoretically.
Because this is 12-13.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 12-13, not 13-14.
So
So then this isn't real. This isn't really what the district is paying necessarily.
no, so that's why I'm asking that question to follow up.
Right.
Yeah, the district's not paying $13,479.
No,
We're paying
we're not.
$5,000.
Right.
The cost of the program is $13,479, but the cost of the district this year is $5,000.
Could we get that not for today, for future, like what we're paying and what?
What is this?
Oh, yeah, we could break it down.
Paying what we're paying.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think for three sports, lacrosse, girls swimming, and crew, although crew is kind of in a slightly different place, but I think that information would be especially helpful because if, I mean, in my perfect world, I would like to move closer, though we may have to do it incrementally, to supporting those sports ourselves if participation continues to be robust. Certainly, at this point in time, lacrosse has seen very good participation. Swimming's been a mixed bag. Girls swimming, eight participants, okay. I mean, boys swimming went from 10 to 0. We didn't have a team this year because the interest wasn't there, and certainly we're not going to be, earmarking money for a sport that doesn't have the student interest to support it. But I mean, if you look at lacrosse, we're paying $5,000 in 13-14 current year, and we want to, if we want to, eventually reach the goal of supporting that entirely, then you can see perhaps another year of a $5,000 increase brings it to a $3,000 shortfall, and then perhaps the year after we can, and those costs will go up too. I mean, they're not going to be static. So it would take us a couple more years of increasing the district's support, say by $5,000 a year, to get to the point where we've essentially taken that over, and we're not relying on the vagaries of fundraising from year to year.
And then those numbers would change, like for swimming, if the district was paying, then there would be a transportation cost. Right?
Yeah.
Alter that.
Yeah.
And the transportation cost was huge because
we have practice transportation and
it's the practice. It's every day off campus. Tennis is off campus, but they either run down there, the kids take their bikes down there, they take the cars down there. We've had other times where we have and there's times when we have just our regular bus going by. Hey, drop the kids off at tennis. Golf, a slight jog out of the way, we drop them off at the golf center. But
on one of our buses.
On one of our buses, so it's no cost to us. Whereas the BART could not be built into anything, so that was a separate cost there and back, and that was very cost prohibitive for the entire program. So they agreed to drive their own children, which helped that reduce the cost that they needed to raise.
Okay, so I think we brought that question to.
So we just need information on how much.
Yeah, what we're looking at is actual cost to the district versus actual cost of the sport.
Right.
That's what we're looking for.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, did you have a question about this?
Yeah, I guess, do you mind if we just talk
stay on this topic?
Yeah, sure.
So I guess I have a number of thoughts just going through my head. Boys swimming, there's still a line item in our budget for $5,000 for boys swimming. So we haven't cut that on the budget.
Yeah, you're right. It's absorbed in the sports budget. Yeah,
and probably for boys football as well, I would guess.
Well, that's my second. So one question is, what do we want to do if there's not participation in boys swimming? Do we want to redistribute it to the rest of the sports programs? Do we want to decrease the budget by that? Do we want to repurpose it for another purpose? And the same thing for football. The numbers here says 12,800. I'm assuming that does not include, I thought it was 10,000 that we added to the program last year for the transportation and the extra cost per students.
Yeah, we added money for transportation because transportation to Hyde Park was, once again, it was just a little jog and drop the kids off. They got to go down there, they got to stay there, and then they have to come back.
So I guess my recollection of that was sort of a one-time kind of bandage to see where bed numbers were going, to see what Hyde Park would do. But participation is certainly not 13 anymore, and the cost is certainly not 12,000 anymore. And we do need a recommendation of how to address that and what we want to do with that money. Crew has certainly been established. I mean, there's a lot of participation. I think it's a really unique thing that our school offers to take advantage of the Hudson River. It's very costly. I don't know that we could ever fully cover it.
Yeah.
It bothers me a little bit that there's this feeling or perception that it's a pay-to-play program. and the paid part is pretty high. So if we could add some money to that, ideally in a perfect world, if we have money to play with, to cut down that number per student has to raise, I think would even increase participation into that. And lacrosse, I know I've already received phone calls saying that there are at least 33 kids interested in trying out and only 27 uniforms. And I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing about that, but
You sew?
uniform. But, you know, I know that Red Hook sort of budgets in a way that they're preparing, I think, for, actually, I'll speak, but my understanding was that they're preparing for possibly a JV team, so they always budget a few more uniforms each year so that there's never one year where there's, hey, we need 20 more uniforms for a JV team. It's something to think about if the trend is that more kids are trying out each year.
You can repurpose the baseball uniforms.
They'll fit over those pads.
So, yeah, it's lots of the conversation.
And, you know, I'm just going to put it out there because I've brought it up before, but I think that the town would really benefit from a sports booster club in general for all of these programs, especially if our budget is going to continue to shrink, and we certainly don't want to give up after-school participation. If anyone out there wants to.
Well, maybe in relation to that numbers issue, if we could just get because the spring sport kids have signed up for, so, you know, they're probably still in play, but if we could get participation numbers from this school year for all the sports.
I have it for the fall and the winter.
In the winter, and, you know,
we ought to
a
be able
good
to lay it
estimate
up.
We
now.
should.
I mean, they begin
We actually
in a week.
probably could have that
So-
by Tuesday night.
Okay.
Right, Tom?
We'll have to talk to Mr. Boucher to make sure that.
We'll try to have it
Because
by
right now,
Tuesday
there's zeros on my book.
Yeah.
Other questions about, or comments about the athletic budget?
I would just like to, if I can, to respond to Diane's rhetorical question at this point in time. My personal opinion, and this is kind of off the cuff without a lot of thought, but my personal opinion is if we were to be able to stay within the confines of the interscholastic athletic program budget, I would agree that if we're not running teams due to lack of student interest or other reasons. I mean, football is not completely lack of student interest. There are no partners out there for us, so our hands are tied there. Boys swimming being an example of insufficient interest. Within the confines of that athletic program, I would say, sure, we ought to look at redistributing that money within the program. However, I'm kind of looking outside of the confines of the interscholastic athletic program and all these moving parts that we've been talking about thus far today. And if I had to decide over, I won't pin down a particular program, but if I had $20,000 from the interscholastic athletic program that I could repurpose to other sports, and another more important academic interest, and I had to repurpose outside of that box, I might recommend repurposing out of that box. Right now, as we sit here this morning, I don't have enough of that other information in play. I mean, we've got $135,000 deficit that we've got to overcome here, and I think while it's doable in a number of different ways, I wouldn't want to make a public commitment to say, yeah, we'll do that. I definitely have an interest in doing that. I've recommended in supporting the list of potential programs and services that in fact we do shoulder more of the burden of those sports that are currently funded. So conceptually, I support that idea, but I wouldn't want to say, yeah, until I know that there isn't something else that's more important on the list that requires our support. But I'm certainly well aware and inclined to think along those lines.
I agree.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Well, one of the things I want to caution about that, if we repurpose those football monies, okay, to wherever it needs to go, is if Hyde Park or wherever says, okay, we're ready for you.
Well, they've already told us,
you know,
they're not interested.
Right, but I'm saying for 15, 16 or 16, 17 as we go down the road. I mean,
Well,
just,
then maybe they'd have to do some fundraising at that point.
well, that's,
You know.
no, that's,
Good point, though.
Diane, you had more questions? No, and that's fine, because we all probably have similar questions, similar programs, so you can help guide us. That.
This one, I guess, would be for Sheldon. I'm wondering how many, and I'm sorry if you've already told us this, how many rooms need to be for the asbestos removal? How many are there in total?
30.
Yeah, so this is for one room, and then there's multiple.
I thought that 30 was for 3 rooms.
two.
Two?
Two.
Okay.
All right. So that's for 2 rooms, and is that all there is, or is there more?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, good work in school.
Okay.
Most of both buildings?
This is for 2 rooms, okay.
Our rooms that are in better shape than as far as the building.
So this is something you're anticipating being there every year, trying to get?
Well, it's not going away, that's for
I was
sure.
gonna say, I think we've discussed in facilities committee that, you know, we should put money in the budget every year to do a couple of rooms because it's cost effective to do it that way rather than have an emergency in the middle of the school year and have to close a room down so that we can, you know, replace tiles because there's broken tiles or whatever, so.
Another option to that would be to do some or all of that work through a capital project. Again, I mean, there's more than one way to skin that cat, but kind of the low-cost incremental way of doing it is to budget, say, $30,000 and just do 2 rooms every summer when there's nobody, you know, when there are no kids in the building, and just chip away. Yeah, will it take 20 years to get the whole district done at that rate? Yeah, sure it will. But the cost of doing 2 rooms proactively is so much more cost effective than doing 1 room under a quote-unquote emergency situation where a corner breaks off a tile and we got to tape the doors closed and bring in the asbestos SWAT team. That's not the case in these rooms, but we had a situation this year, and we're just, if we can stay on top of it even a little bit, probably not a bad idea.
Is it cheaper than, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Is it
No,
cheaper than, oh, no, go.
I was just going to say that to the extent that we are planning some capital projects in the more distant future, like the roof replacement project, which we've been talking about, that may be something that we can build in a portion of when we do that, but at least we will have, as you say, chipped away at that to some extent, and so that cost would be less. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, basically this past year when we had the emergency, it was what? Maybe they replaced 8 square feet, 10 square feet?
Yeah.
For really what it would have cost to do the entire room on a non-emergency basis, is really what it comes down to. So we got this little section here done for the same price that we could have done for an entire thing if we had done it on a non-emergency basis, with all the monitoring and all that good stuff. And
And the rooms that have asbestos tile that are in good shape, there's nothing wrong with them. There's no hurry to replace those. It's good tile, it's a good floor.
Was the room where that emergency happened, so to speak, or where it cracked, was that something you can tell ahead of time, that it's vulnerable?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if we're doing 2 a year, you have a...
Really loose, you have some rooms that have
Okay.
tile that are loose. And when they pop up and then they get broken and then...
Some rooms are in better shape than others. regarding
Right,
the
so
time.
you can identify which ones are...
Not an issue at all, and there's, you know, people do that.
Diane, did you have a comment on this?
I did. So, you know, we talked about this a little bit last time on years. It's rare that Sheldon actually uses his entire budget. This year was an exception because of the weather. We could do it as there's room available in excess budget money for that. Or, you know, we have the healthcare holiday some years that we don't budget for, which is an extra $200,000. And I just wanted to point out in our fund balance projections and our surplus, I don't think it's a coincidence that we have a surplus of $200,000 this year. We had a holiday of $200,000. We never budget, assuming that we're going to get that, because that would be irresponsible, and we end up with $200,000 left over. That would be a great, we could spend $90,000 a year, as many years as we get the holiday, and replace the asbestos and not have to add a line item into our budget for that too.
it's a possibility too. I mean, that's what, you know, that's one of the things as we get towards the end of this year, we can make decisions in the finance committee to determine how to use fund balance, how to manage that, because one of the things you can do instead of putting money into the fund balance, we can spend it to reduce it, or we can encumber those monies to do that work that summer. So, we can make a decision in May, get everything we need to do, get that all in place by the end of June, so those monies are using in the old year and won't affect the new year in budgeting, and then we do the work in the summertime, but using the prior year's money. No, that's a good idea. I mean, we've done that a couple of times on some other projects. Not big ones, but like door replacements we did, and didn't we do that? No, I was trying to think of the whole sidewalk thing we did, Chancellor on the curb.
Right.
That was different.
That was a
We got
different
outside
type of thing, yeah. That was different.
Just to kind of remind, on this topic, just to kind of remind everybody, part of our planning is to look at how we might be able to do that kind of work. The other thing is we put things on the list of, what's the euphemism that we use, potential programs and services list at the board's request to do that, to give you a variety of things that we see as near-term needs, not necessarily we really have to do these this year or we'd really like to do these this year. Some of them are placeholders to put them on your radar so that next year when they come up again, the discussion is, yeah, we've been putting this on the list for a few years, we haven't been able to get to it. Now's the time. Now it's getting to be more of a need than a want. So we know that we're not going to do everything on that list, and this year we may not be able to do much of anything on the list depending on how all these other factors work out, but they're out there. They're things that we think need to be at least given consideration and discussion. That asbestos situation is not going to go away, and doing it 2 rooms at a time is going to take a long time to address it. But at least it's moving in the right direction, and maybe a capital project at some point tied in with roofing work winds up doing it, finishing the school, and all right, then that's it. But we're putting it on the list so it's out there as an issue. It's not a gotta do right now. Otherwise, we'd be putting it in the budget. But it's something that needs to be done at some point. So anyway, enough of that.
Okay, go ahead.
This would be for Dr. Davenport. The physical education equipment, is this replacing equipment or new equipment? I feel
That's
like
new equipment.
this would be
Heart rate
new.
monitors and iPads for students.
So it's an iPad cart and the heart rate monitors, is that right?
What, and how does the physical education department use that?
Well, heart rate monitors are used primarily to assist students in identifying their target heart rates so that they can track their own fitness progress throughout the school year. iPads would be used in conversations with Lisa and David for a variety of functions. Students can record one another in performing a tennis serve or volleyball serve. It offers them the opportunity to have instant feedback. There are a variety of apps, as I understand it, in which students can make YouTube videos, for example, to see what the correct form for different sports and activities are. And the uses just would grow from there.
The next question's for you also. Can you talk a little, you've explained to us about the system for the guidance office. Can you talk about the need for it to be a guidance counselor to implement that instead of maybe a support staff or someone else?
Sure. Well, just recently, Mr. Kempis and Mr. Krebs and I had a webinar with Career Cruising to see some of the functions that software has. Primarily, it assists with career exploration and also tracking college applications. It's not, at this point, as I understand, a platform through which students can apply to college. Day before yesterday, our guidance staff also attended the same webinar. I haven't had a chance yet to talk with them and get their feedback about career improvement. so the conversation is still in flux. Naviance, as I understand it, which is the other software we were looking at, may not be currently the best fit for what we're attempting to do with college applications. So as a result, the guidance counselor is migrated towards the bottom of the potential programs and services. It's still very interested in a software program. Again, awaiting guidance counselor feedback to assist with the college careers classes. Again, to better answer your question, if we were to move in the direction of Naviance with all of the instruction both for students and for parents, I think we would need a guidance counselor professional to assist with that. With career cruising, if we head in that direction, that more neatly fits in with what we're doing in high school for college and careers. And I wouldn't expect that at this point that we would need any human resources support to implement that.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is for Mr. Chemnitzer. So foreign language, a yearly conversation. I'm just wondering where we are on that. Is it closer to a reality? Is it schedules? Where are we?
No. No, and as I've explained in the past, and as Joe just kind of characterized this is a conversation I want to continue to have. However, as I've explained, the master schedule at all 3 grade levels is so tight at this point that expanding our foreign language program in the 7th grade to run every day rather than every other day would need to eliminate something else. One of the things that we're going to look at, Steve and I have talked about is how we're delivering computer instruction 6/8, and that's there's a possibility that some shift in that program and how we deliver it now as a pull-out program may open up the additional space that we need within the master schedule to expand foreign languages. But we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
It's just one of those conversations I want to keep on the radar.
I'm good.
Other questions? Laura?
Well, so this question is for Brett and Marvin and Steve. Mr. Phelan promised that you'd give me a rundown about your visit to Saratoga on Wednesday for the science program that you went to check out. So any of the 3 of you can jump in.
We went to Lake Avenue School in Saratoga. From what I understand, they also had a Project Lead the Way rep there, and there were several districts like ours that came to kind of see this them as a launch school. From what I understand, it's actually one of the only ones in the Northeast. Not that they're the only ones doing Project Lead the Way, but I guess it's a certified launch school, Project Lead the Way. So when we went there, we got an opportunity to see, they're a K-5 school, almost identically same size as Chancellor. The district is obviously larger, but this building is about the same. About 4 sections per grade, K-5. They showed us their model, which was they had a lead teacher who went to, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, jump in if I'm misstating anything, but basically they had a lead teacher that went to a multi-day training for the modules. Got a chance, if I remember, I think he said 1st, 3rd, and 5th, do projects with those specific grades, get a little in-depth training. And then comes back to the school and works. So he in this case, he doesn't have a classroom. He works with the 6 teachers across K through 5, 1 per grade, that got trained on the specific modules that relate to their grades. This was a very the school itself, it seemed to me as the conversations went on, was a very pilot-heavy building to the point where some grades, all 4 classes were doing different things in certain areas because they were trying a lot, everything from adopting the state modules for the Common Core, and then a lot of those things. So they were kind of all over the place with that, but trying to find out their educational identity, I guess that's what it's describing. So we got to do that. We got to visit the classrooms. We talked to the teachers in advance. The kids came in. The teachers went back. And we got a chance to just kind of in some cases, interview students about their projects. In other cases, walk into a classroom and kind of talk to the whole class and the teacher. In other cases, kids that were right in the middle of project development and collaborative work. And so we got to see, I think, that array of experience. I spent a lot of time talking to students, to be honest with you. Because a big part of Project Lead the Way and adopting some of the modules as enrichment, science enrichment, I think a huge part of it is collaboration, and that's with 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, you know, how they kind of problem solve together, and you got to give them, you know, you set the foundation and give them a little freedom to do that. And you know, one of the things I personally got a lot out of that, you know, one, I had a lot of questions about our master schedule and what that might look like. The good thing is there was another school from Connecticut who's in the same place we are in, wanting to do the same model, which rather than you have teachers on, you know, one teacher on the grade doing it, that we have a STEM lab that teachers bring their classes to and kind of co-teach with. So that model does exist somewhere in the country. There's nowhere in the East Coast and the Northeast that we can go see that. But again, you know, a lot of things that come out of these, and I'm sure you guys have all been in that kind of position, a lot of things that come out of these visits are that kind of networking with other districts as well. So the good thing is I kind of connected with the Marvin and the Brett of this other district, my principal of the elementary school and the curriculum director in Connecticut, who want to do the same thing. The funny thing there is the principal and the curriculum director are actually in 2 different places as far as what they want it to look like. And I think one of the big issues for the principal there, and I can share this, I share it with her, space. Luckily, we don't have that. You know, we have the science lab that we currently use. It's a space we could retrofit to work for what we want. So that's a good, you know, problem to not have. I think master schedule, building it in, making sure we get K-5 involved, you know, and still kind of holding on to, if it's a full-time position, holding on to the science facilitation in general, as well as being, you know, lab over and above Project Lead the Way. So anyway, I thought it was a good visit. We spent a little more than half a day. We also got to take a look at the science lab there. Marvin and I and Stephen went down after it was all over and spent some time in their science lab talking to the facilitators there, which actually turned out to be not only a full-time teacher, but literally a 40-hour-a-week full-time volunteer who happened to be her mother, who was a science facilitator for years and years and years, set up labs everywhere. I would probably say a good percentage of the materials in that room were actually brought by her in her personal collection. And her, if I remember right, I think her biggest, her big interests were rocks and minerals and bones, skeleton, you know, all different animals. So we got to see that environment too, and I think kind of looking at the hybrid between the 2 places. In their case, that science lab doesn't really facilitate Project Lead the Way stuff. It's more supplemental, you know, similar to what we were trying to do with the part-time position we currently have, you know, supplementing the kids, supplementing the science curriculum from the classroom. So I kind of, you know, I think it helped frame the vision a little bit. I know you had asked in January, Laura, when I was here, just about a little more, you know, specifics, and I think over the last 2 months we've really been able to kind of shore that up around materials, around, you know, using the space, and certainly around master schedule, those sorts of things. So I can talk a little further about that if you guys want. But to kind of wrap up the initial question about the update for the visit, I thought it was very helpful. It was worth the 2-hour drive to get down and up there and watch the school implementing it. You know, one of the things was, just one last thing I'll say about it, I know they intended on doing it in October, starting in October. As it turned out, for a handful of reasons, they didn't start until about 6 weeks ago. And you'd be amazed at what they've accomplished in that 6 weeks. So it was good to see something working. A bit of a different model, but got everybody talking and made some connections to other groups that I think other people that I can reach out to as we start to figure this out.
I was going to follow up on that thing, on the topic. So as far as the budget, one of the potential programs and services is to have a full-time STEM teacher at CLS. It's described here as building on the success of the Gateway to Technology program, providing that you know, a continuum between Chancellor and BMS. With some uncertainty about how this is going to look, I guess I'm a little. I just want to know how a full-time teacher fits into this in terms of needs, and I guess a concern about attaching it so much to an outside kind of program and I guess, obviously you're developing all this, but how does this fit in? Are we creating a position and a lab that's really is the goal that's focused on this Project Lead the Way, Gateway to Technology, whatever they're going to call it in the elementary school program, science, technology, engineering, math in those early grades is, open to all kinds of things. Are we really focused on this very particular program, or what's the vision, or it's still really being developed? And if it's still being really developed, does it warrant a full-time person right now?
That's a good question. In looking at master schedule, the potency of that full-time is actually what we've been looking at. Right now, Project Lead the Way, just really, especially since we've had such great success in the middle school, obviously, we did start and focus on that, program. Primarily it is STEM driven, which, we're not quite there yet with our next gen standards and things like that the state is putting out. I think, the goal here was not to lose the original idea for the science facilitator position, really had to do with, I think, foundationally understanding that teachers need to get hands-on activities with their classes, do experiments, things like that, and that becomes cumbersome to try to set up, and I can say, as my experience as a classroom teacher, it is, trying to set that up in your classroom within the confines of your schedule and things like that. So I don't want to lose that, and the supplemental aspect of that lab to the curriculum that we're creating, and the scope and sequence for each grade is how that lays out. I don't want to lose that because there is a necessity for it. Making it full-time now, does still hold on to that aspect of it, but then also allows us to take real STEM instruction that is specifically developed, keeping the standards in mind and the developmental appropriateness of the students in mind. That becomes extremely supplemental and kind of picks up where perhaps the next gen standards don't quite get to, or the current standards that we're working with. The idea is this, I brought it with me, I don't have copies for everyone, but the idea is right now they currently have 2 modules per grade, and this is Project Lead the Way, set up, and they're testing them, they're working with them. They just finished the 2nd module per grade, so there's 12 modules K through 5, right? Those modules, and I'll give you kind of an example quickly, just kind of going grade by grade. So I don't know, taking a look at, for example, 2nd grade modules starts with science materials, properties of matter. The 2nd module is the same material science, but form and function, and kind of what students do around that. So for example, properties of matter, students investigate and classify different kinds of materials by their observable properties. After testing materials and analyzing the data, the students will determine the best material to solve the design problem. That's very broad, but it's engineer specific and problem solving specific and scientific method specific and things like that. And it allows us to kind of create, in my opinion, what really speaks to me about how Project Lead the Way kind of runs it is, first of all, they've got a lot of schools countrywide and nationally that they can kind of look at the models that have been created. But also, I share that like 2nd grade information as far as the unit, because it is directly connected to certain aspects of what we do in our science instruction in 2nd grade. The idea would be this. The halftime addition would allow us to apply these modules per grade. Now how that would look like, whether it would be 1 module per grade, because we've got to look at master schedule, and I've been doing that, or if it's both modules per grade. We take those modules, where does properties of matter and form and function fit into the current 2nd grade curriculum? And that time of year is when we would do those modules with that grade. I think the only way to do it, honestly, is, unlike kind of, I think what we do in the middle school, and it's different, you're dealing with different students, you're dealing with different environment, we would do 1 grade at a time. So 2nd grade, all 4 classes would come and go through the modules with the science facilitator while co-teaching with the teachers, because they'll be in there as well working together, which, by the way, allows, and I'm jumping all over the place, but also allows the teacher perhaps to do some foundational skills in their classroom, because it's directly connected to what they're currently working on in their curriculum that time of year, in anticipation of getting into that lab and working with it. So, you might see 2nd grade comes in at the beginning of the year, 4th grade is after that, 5th grade, 1st grade, kindergarten, blah, blah, blah. It is very supplemental. It is very, like you said, STEM focused, which we're starting to move towards anyway. You know, problem solving. It's directly related to a lot of the other things that kids are going to be doing K through 5 in their classrooms as a result of the Common Core, Next Gen Standards, all that good stuff. So we have to be very strategic about how we implement that, and I think increasing that time by half. You know, there's a little more over and above like filling their schedule other than doing the modules. I do envision this person needing maybe 2 more extra preps a week. So, you know, obviously they get their normal preps for prep time to set up for experiments, set up for the grade coming in. But they are going to need time to sit with a grade level that they're currently going to be working with, or, by the way, is coming down the road around the STEM information. Because, like I said, integration into the classroom, touching on some of those foundational skills moving forward. The teachers partnering with this person would be a really big part of the success of the project. But what I just said has gone over a lot of different versions as far as what the master schedule looked like. I mean, originally I had started to look at it as, well, we'll have, you know, multiple grades going on at once and things like that. The training and to do it right, I think, is focusing on 1 grade at a time, how these modules and the 2 they have set up per grade currently fit into the scope and sequence of our curriculum anyway, and then starting to plant that in as the year goes on. I do understand that they're also working on 2 more modules, and these are connected, they're sequential, they work with each other. For next year, you know, right now, I think we're going to focus on the 2 that they have. And depending on how this looks, you know, we may focus on the first module per grade as we go through it. You know, we'll need a little time once we apply the master schedule to kind of tweak it, and I think if it turns out it's a full-time position, next year will be a, you know, there's also, by the way, I know, again, I'm throwing a lot at you for this question, but in addition, there's online training for each grade's module. So in addition to that kind of prep time, this person will also need to kind of go through the 10 to 15 hours of online training prior to the next grade coming in so they can plan and move forward. I don't expect that to be something ongoing inevitably for this person, but the first year that'll be for the project as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions related to that position? Or Laura, you had raised the question.
Well, it sounds like you want this program at Chancellor. That's really where I was going. Do you want it?
In everything I've seen, I think they're on the ball better than most. I do like the idea that, I mean, through this whole conversation starting this summer, you know, we pulled Brian McDonald in this, you know, also because I think he's got insight in this program. He supports it 100%, seems to really like where it's going. And he was the first person, knowing that I was interested. Literally, it came out, I got an email from him, check out this link. They started these modules, let's take a look at them. I just think it's a wonderful connection. And they've really kept in mind, you heard me mention it earlier, not only the developmental appropriateness of what we're doing here, but how it fits into the understanding that we're revamping our curriculum based on the Common Core and moving forward. So I think it's the best way to go. I think it does accomplish that feat of feeding into, you know, having kids in kindergarten, you know, working through these types of activities and these types of modules, knowing that, you know, all the way up until they get to 9th grade, they have an opportunity to keep building on that. That's a selling point for me, certainly. And it's interesting, you know, you hear the word program, you kind of start program, but this is very discovery based. They give you the guidance, and there's, you know, even this, the way I describe that, there's a lot of freedom in student interest, and I do envision some level of surveying student interest, kind of figure out, you know, per grade as to how that might look, and what projects are specifically.
Great. Did you have any other questions right now?
No.
Okay. Other questions, Diane?
Is this something that you would want to see happen to some extent, whether you have a half-time science teacher or a full-time science teacher next year?
It is. I'd like a version of it, and it's a great question. I've been thinking about it. And, you know, if it turns out to be the same year, because we still have that AIS math need, hold on to that. You know, we may focus on something more. And this is kind of where we may have to focus more on a 3, 4, 5, and you know, maybe pull it back more as kind of a way of piloting what we can do there. I do see if we do that, the chances of possibly, you know, maybe at least guaranteeing both modules for at least those 3 grades would be a plus of doing that. But I'd love some version of it. Yeah, it would be great. One thing I have to just address with that, though, is, and perhaps not the 2 months, maybe just one, because again, I still want to secure, and this is where I think conversations with my staff moving forward, and they're going to happen as early as next week, securing what that lab offers already and keeping that going as far as just a supplement of some of the, and it might just be heavier on some grades and less on others, but it'll be balanced.
Okay, other questions? I have a question, Marvin. The Curriculum Governance Council is ranked at the top of the list here. Joe has informed us about your concept of that I think is really important to incentivize faculty participation in curriculum governance. I know it's hard, having been the board representative of the CDEP team, during the day, and how that works for them with their teaching and getting subs, and I can see the frustration with that. But if you wanted to speak to it at all, and is that adequate amount of money? Do you feel that you're related to this, that your professional development budget is adequately funded? Because I know we've been doing so much professional development in all kinds of other arenas with technology, and other things that have been mentioned tonight. There's discussion about additional professional development. So I guess if you want to just speak to that a little bit, the importance of the Governance Council, and whether you feel you have adequate resources.
Those are a lot of questions. I'll do my best. Well, let's start with the issue of the Curriculum Governance Council. My thinking has evolved over the last, say, decade or so with regard to the comprehensive district education planning process, the vertical teams as they are currently constructed. When we, somewhere around 99-2000, when I got here, none of these governance structures really existed, and we went to work to try to create them. And at the time, the CDEP team process and the vertical team process made a lot of sense to us, and I think we got a lot of mileage out of it during the time in the run to the No Child Left Behind Act, and having to respond to, the political context at the federal level and at the state level. And I think it served us well. We got a lot of work done, I think, and very meaningfully. However, over the course of time, it was fairly obvious to all of us that it was really putting a lot of pressure on the academic program to pull teachers off the line, to ask them to participate in governance processes, and while they really felt this compelling need to be back in their classrooms teaching their classes. And instructional time has become, it's at a premium now. So there's opportunity costs that you're giving up when you pull teachers out. In addition to that, so what ended up happening was a lot of times those teams were, they were like advice and counsel teams. We would ask them questions, they'd ask them to go back and network with their colleagues or whatever. It was hard for them to do so because of the way their schedules are meshed up. It was hard to get cross-building communication in a way that made sense. We tried some strategies to make that work as best we could. Well, so now enter the current, situation, and this is where my thinking has started to evolve a bit on governance. We've got a lot of sort of external contextual variables affecting the schools. We've got people out there deciding what your curriculum should look like in your schools, from the federal government through the State Departments of Education. And I'm feeling this need to have an internal filter for that kind of pressure, in which a serious team of intellectuals who are degreed in their particular discipline have the opportunity to sit down and carefully analyze what it is that we're being asked to do and make important professional decisions about what that's going to look like and sound like here in our local school district. And that the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school reflect our best thinking and what our shared vision for what our schools should look like. In some cases, those standards may be higher than what they're asking us to do. In some cases, we may make determinations that those standards are developmentally inappropriate for certain populations of kids at certain grade levels. And in my professional opinion, I think we need to start filtering that and making those decisions ourselves. this is just my own personal belief, but I'm a strong believer in empowerment and notions of self-efficacy and not just being pushed around by a bunch of people who are politicians and educational thinkers outside the organization. I think it's our professional responsibility, quite frankly, to take that stance. So I'm trying to say, okay, what direction can we move to start to respond meaningfully to that need that I see? I feel like the vertical team process, while teachers did their best, and I certainly do not want to speak disparagingly of them, it's hard for them to try to manage, okay, I'm going to talk to a sub while I'm running out the door, and I really need you to have them do this because on Friday I have the kids doing this and I can't really give up 40 minutes of instruction time. So they did their best. So I need them to be able to have the opportunity to kind of step that process up to a next level of responsibility where we could do collective research on topics that might be important, discuss what that might mean for our particular school, be that elementary school mathematics, be that this discussion that you just had about the implementation of the next generation standards for science in our elementary school. What does that mean? Well, careful academic planning, curriculum governance does not take place in quick back and forth discussions between people at tables like this. That's not how that's done properly. So I'm suggesting that this might give us an opportunity to do that. I also like it from another point of view in that, there's an awful lot of, and I don't know, this is going to sound like a political term, but there's like teacher bashing out there like crazy in the system, right? Well, when in point of fact, we have a lot of folks who we've hired into our system who have degrees in their discipline. They have degrees in mathematics, they have degrees in teaching advanced science. I think we need to respect that professionalism that they demonstrate, that professional knowledge, and use that because that's a huge resource to this organization. If we can leverage that in a process like I just described, then I think A, the district's going to benefit from that, but I also think it shows them the professional respect that they deserve. Most of them have graduate school educations. They're school people. They've spent their entire lives in school, most of them since they were 4 years old. So they know and understand their work. So why not give them an opportunity, A, to be recognized for that, and then B, to actually let them dig into something that most of them have a lot of passion about. So that's the sort of thinking around the curriculum governance team. To your other point, yeah, getting it outside the contractual working day so that they had a little bandwidth to really do some of this work might be helpful. I think it would help them clear their minds a little bit. Now, in terms of the exact structure, like how many people, I think we were talking generally in a placeholder kind of way, so that number that you see there is a placeholder number. First of all, it hasn't been negotiated out between the district and the bargaining unit yet, so we weren't quite sure how to, so we ballparked a number. But I'm thinking, and again, this is just how I think about this stuff, you want to try to right size it. You can't get too big or else the process will be kind of unwieldy and difficult to manage. If it's too small, you're not going to get enough stakeholders represented. So somewhere in the 10 to 12 range was the number that I sort of landed on, with kind of an equal distribution of representation across elementary, middle, and high. And so is that number big enough? Well, that, I don't mean to be ambiguous, but, maybe, but maybe it needs to be a little bigger. It depends on how it shakes out, the number of people. So that's that issue of curriculum governance. I'm grateful that people actually developed an interest in it because, again, in the current political context about public education, too often I think it becomes sort of a strident, sort of polarized debate about who can give the best quick and then win that little debate at that moment when responsible people don't plan schools like that. Responsible people sit down and think carefully and closely about scope and sequence of curriculum, K-12, what that means for individual children as well as groups of children, and they do careful analysis and planning, both in the short term, medium term, and long term. They phase in certain things, so they focus on certain disciplines and certain times, and cue that stuff up in a strategic way. They work creatively and meaningfully with budget processes so that the necessary funding is there. So I'm trying to move in that direction, talk about academic stuff that way. So then the last thing was, I think you said, is there enough money for professional development? I think that depends on where you're coming from. We did increase, actually quite substantially, our summer curriculum budget this year, and we define that as a need as opposed to a wish list item, because we feel like it's an absolute necessity. We've got to get teachers working together over the summer to continue working on writing curriculum and meaningfully adjusting what they're doing with the kids. So we tried to take a position here in the district that we're not going to just adopt units of study from the state and say, well, we're just going to do what the state education department tells us to do off the Engage NY website. Instead, what we're going to do is try to meaningfully adjust those as we go along. So, you know as well as I do, that means teams of teachers have to get together and meaningfully engage with those units of study. We can do some of that during the school year, but you can't roll the sidewalks up and shut the program down. You've got to have, you can only do so many of those days of subbing out teachers and pulling them into the PD room. So a lot of that work gets done in the summer. So that's why that budget has significantly increased. And I think it's a, I think it's a reasonable amount of money to ask for to continue to work. I think we can do much of what we hope to accomplish next summer with that money. I would say one other issue that's professional development that will be challenging us, I think, over the next few years is as professional faculty rolls over and we have a lot of folks retire out and we hire a lot of young folks into the organization. I think that demand on our professional development budget will go up. I think we need to think about that very carefully as we go forward, look for creative ways and so on to meet that need as we adopt a new generation of teachers in the school system. So there'll be some cost drivers there that we'll have to think about. Just to cycle back to your very first conversation, the Title II grant and the Title I grant have been systematically cut every year since I've been here, and it continues to be the case. At some point out in the future, I never actually did the math, but I can probably tell you when they zero it out, because there's some time out there in the future when that budget is gone, if they keep doing what they're doing. So there's a little bit of a, I'm not going to kind of read this demand for an increase in teacher quality, while teacher quality grants are being systematically cut every year. I don't really understand that myself, being somebody smarter than me.
Well, that approach to a curriculum governance council and your rationale is fantastic, and a really astute, smart way of addressing the pressures on our teachers. And I mean, that kind of thinking for the past several years has enabled us to really, weather this sort of craziness coming down from both federal and state government and all these demands to really, use the resources we have here, which are people, and think about how we do it here. You must know that the board, had the privilege of listening to Rick Campbell and our elementary teachers who've been working with him on that kind of professional development speak at our last board meeting, and that was really fantastic for us to see the depth of that kind of work, which is probably why I asked about the professional development, because that was very exciting work for us to see and important and really meaningful. So thanks for your answers there. Does anyone else have questions on this particular item? Okay, any other questions? I have a question then for Ed about the social science elective. If you could just, I know the social science electives that we've added this year are well enrolled, and then what that looks like sort of structurally. Do we have the capacity for another, in terms of like enough students and scheduling for an additional elective in the social science, which I wholeheartedly support. Just, parenthetically, we do a lot with technology, but I think like the social sciences, the arts, they help us, think about how we use technology and not just learn to use technology. So, but just capacity-wise, how is that going to look, and how does it look if we don't fund that?
Using this year's numbers, this year's master's schedule, just as a guide, there are still a number of upperclassmen who I'd say are not taking advantage of all of our offerings. So in terms of the numbers of students who could potentially enroll in an additional social science elective, the numbers are there. And the space in the master's schedule is there as well. If we add another course, We have a space on either end of the day, period 1, period 9, to accommodate that other section. At this point, as guidance counselors are taking requests for next year, we've got a couple offerings only on our course request sheet, so we can begin to get a better idea of the numbers of requests. And that will enable us to do a better job should this be approved to schedule the social science elective appropriate. So to summarize, based on this year's model, this year's numbers of students, yes, we would have, we're anticipating we would have the numbers to enroll in another social science elective, and we do have space in the master's schedule. On a side note, based on our psychology course this year, Mr. Moore, Mr. Krebs, and I are in conversation regarding potentially extending the psychology course to a year-long course next year, and partnering with Dutchess County Community College to offer that for DCC credit. So we're at the initial stages of exploring that possibility.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other questions right now, are there any members of the public who want to comment, or any other comments from our administrators? Anyone want to add to some discussion that we've had? All right.
I would just say that our building principals are scheduled to give their monthly reports at our March 25th meeting. So there will be another opportunity to discuss any of these items or our updated thinking on any of them on the 25th. If there is, after we all go on our way today, and as you ponder today's discussion, if there is an interest in bringing any of the other administrators back for follow-up questions, I'll take them out to lunch and see if I can twist their arm to bring them back. But I know they're very interested in the outcome of our budget deliberations because they're passionate about their programs and they want the best for kids. So I'm saying this by way of saying this isn't like the last opportunity to engage our administrators in these conversations. I think that the discussions and the questions today were very meaningful, helpful to me, who's been hearing about this for months, to kind of crystallize some of my own thinking, and hopefully, helpful to you in terms of positioning ourselves to making what will inevitably be some decisions one way or the other as this whole very complex scenario kind of pans out over the next 4 weeks or so. So it's helped me in that process, and hopefully it's helped you as well. I appreciate their time, including those who didn't get a question thrown at them, but who I hope have benefited from hearing the conversation of kind of seeing more of a big picture view, because we have to deal with the big picture view. Their picture is not necessarily small, but I mean it's more focused, and as it should be. That's their job, to focus on their particular area of responsibility in our organization, and so it's a good idea to kind of get the bigger picture, and hopefully it's been helpful and beneficial for them as well. And I hope nobody leaves feeling ignored because they weren't asked a question. Probably relieved is more like it, but I appreciate them being here as well.
Yes, no, absolutely. All of your presence here is really important. The conversation's great. I think for us to hear directly from you on why you do what you're doing, and it's our job with Joe to work through the financial pieces of it, but we appreciate the efforts. This whole exercise in putting together potential programs and services, I think, has been really useful. And I just want to thank you for the work that you are doing under these difficult conditions these past several years to really, keep this school system running just so well. We have a lot to be proud of, and all of the work that you talk about today is just confirmation of that. And so even through all this, there's a lot of exciting stuff that's going on. And we've seen some dark times in the past few years, both financially and with all these regulations, but I'm proud that we are navigating it very well. We may not be able to fund all of these things to the extent that we want to, but you know, we're clearly moving in the right direction and balancing the various needs. So all of your presence here is appreciated as we work together to that end. So if there are no other comments, then may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
By Mark?
Second.
Second by Lisa. All those in favor? That's unanimous. We're adjourned. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
I just noticed that. See, my dear.
Oh, you're switched. It's just- Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, too.
Yeah, what's that? Oh.
Jen brought her son today, huh?
Yeah, you know, once that kind of happens, and then you can't get it out of your head.